Nero Claudius Caesar, Augustus Germanicus, was born on December 15, 37 CE, in Antium near Rome. He was the son of Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus and Agrippina the Younger, who was the sister of Emperor Caligula. His lineage traced directly to the Julio-Claudian dynasty, giving him a legitimate claim to the imperial throne. After the assassination of Emperor Caligula, Agrippina married Emperor Claudius, her uncle, in 49 CE. This marriage elevated Nero's status within the Roman imperial family. Claudius later adopted Nero as his son, displacing his biological son Britannicus from the line of succession. This adoption positioned Nero as the future emperor of Rome. When Claudius died in 54 CE, Nero ascended the throne at the age of 16. Some ancient historians, including Tacitus and Suetonius, alleged that Agrippina poisoned Claudius to ensure her son's rise to power. Nero's accession was welcomed by the Senate and the people, who saw him as young, cultured, and promising. In his early years, Nero ruled under the guidance of his mother Agrippina, the philosopher Seneca, and the Praetorian prefect Burrus. This initial phase of his reign, often referred to as the Quinquennium Neronis, or the 5 good years, was marked by moderate governance and public reforms. The emperor promoted arts, games, and public welfare measures. Nero showed a strong interest in culture, particularly music, poetry, and performance. He considered himself an artist and spent considerable time pursuing theatrical and musical ambitions. His participation in public performances was unconventional for a Roman emperor and was often criticized by the Senate and traditional elites. Agrippina, who had played a crucial role in securing her son's position, expected to wield power through him. However, Nero grew resentful of her dominance and influence over state matters. Their relationship deteriorated as Nero sought independence in his rule. Eventually, in 59 CE, he ordered her assassination, marking a turning point in his reign. The removal of Agrippina consolidated Nero's authority, but it also revealed his willingness to eliminate perceived threats to his power. Following her death, Nero increasingly surrounded himself with flatterers and advisors who encouraged his excesses rather than curbing them. His governance became less restrained and more self-indulgent. Nero expanded public entertainment, sponsoring games, races, and theatrical performances to gain favor with the populace. He believed that providing amusement maintained stability and loyalty among citizens. His policies, however, began to strain Rome's treasury due to the enormous costs of these events. In foreign affairs, Nero's reign was marked by mixed outcomes. The Roman general Corbulo achieved significant victories in Armenia, strengthening Roman influence in the east. Meanwhile, Nero's relationship with Britain suffered after the Boudiccan rebellion in 60 CE, which resulted in heavy losses before Roman forces restored control. Domestically, Nero initiated various urban development projects. He invested in new buildings, roads, and public works to improve Rome's infrastructure. These projects served both practical and propagandistic purposes, showcasing his leadership while appealing to the masses. Nero's interest in the arts and luxury led him to neglect administrative duties. As his personal ambitions grew, his attention to governance declined. The Senate began losing influence, as Nero increasingly relied on personal advisors and favorites. His authority became more centralized, with less consultation and oversight. By the mid-60s CE, Nero's extravagance became evident in his lavish spending and architectural endeavors. He commissioned the construction of the Domus Transitoria, a grand palace connecting the Palatine and Esquiline hills. This reflected his desire for grandeur and personal comfort rather than the collective benefit of the empire. Nero's attitude toward the senatorial class worsened over time. He viewed senators with suspicion and considered them potential rivals. Accusations of treason became common, and executions of prominent figures grew frequent. The emperor's paranoia contributed to an atmosphere of fear within Rome's political elite. Despite his growing unpopularity among the upper class, Nero retained the affection of the common people through public spectacles and monetary distributions. He understood the power of popular entertainment as a means to maintain social control and minimize dissent. In 64 CE, a massive fire broke out in Rome, destroying large portions of the city. Ancient sources differ on whether Nero was responsible for the fire or not. What is certain is that the disaster provided him with an opportunity to implement ambitious reconstruction plans. He envisioned a new Rome, built according to his artistic ideals. Following the fire, Nero initiated the construction of the Domus Aurea, or the Golden House. This sprawling palace complex symbolized his imperial vision, but also drew criticism for its extravagance amid public suffering. Its gold-plated walls, artificial lake, and elaborate gardens demonstrated his obsession with luxury. The reconstruction of Rome under Nero introduced urban reforms, including wider streets and improved building materials to prevent future fires. While these measures had practical merit, they were overshadowed by resentment over the emperor's appropriation of land for his palace. Nero's reign also saw increasing tension between traditional Roman religious practices and emerging sects, including the early Christians. Though initially ignored, this group's growing presence in Rome would later intersect with Nero's need for scapegoats after the Great Fire. By the late 60s CE, Nero's image had transformed from that of a youthful reformer to an extravagant autocrat. His governance relied heavily on spectacle and personal glorification. The empire's finances were strained, and dissatisfaction among the elite continued to rise. Despite this, Nero maintained his focus on artistic pursuits. He performed publicly in Greece during the later years of his reign, participating in singing and chariot racing competitions. His desire for cultural recognition often took precedence over political stability. The first decade of Nero's rule displayed a clear trajectory from cautious governance to indulgent autocracy. His early promise was overshadowed by his detachment from administrative responsibilities and his pursuit of fame through art and architecture. The consequences of these tendencies would soon manifest in acts of brutality that defined his legacy. Quick reminder, if you are enjoying, do like the video and subscribe the channel for upcoming historical torture content. In this period, Rome stood as both a city of splendor and tension. The emperor's ambitions reshaped its landscape, but beneath the surface, unrest grew among citizens, soldiers, and senators. Nero's rule had entered a new phase, one where self-expression and control would merge into displays of cruelty and fear. After consolidating power, Nero's rule transitioned from indulgent governance to open cruelty. The fire of 64 CE marked a defining moment in his reign. The blaze lasted for days, consuming vast districts of Rome, leaving thousands homeless. Ancient historians such as Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio wrote that suspicion soon fell on the emperor himself due to the scope of destruction and his immediate plans for reconstruction. Nero denied any involvement, but public anger demanded accountability. To deflect blame, he identified an unpopular group, the Christians, as the alleged perpetrators. At the time, Christianity was still a small and misunderstood sect within the empire. Its followers rejected the worship of Roman gods and imperial cults, which made them appear subversive. The emperor ordered mass arrests. Christians were accused of arson and atheism, crimes punishable by death under Roman law. The ensuing crackdown became one of the earliest and most notorious persecutions of Christians in history. Nero sought not only to punish, but also to use the executions as public spectacle. The chosen method of execution reflected both his need for display and his disregard for human life. Many prisoners were covered in pitch, tar, or oil and tied to posts throughout his palace gardens. At night, Nero ordered them set alight, their burning bodies illuminating his festivities. This act earned the grim description, Human Candles of Nero. Roman accounts describe how Nero watched these executions from his palace balcony, sometimes mingling with guests while dressed in theatrical costumes. The events were presented as entertainment rather than punishment. The emperor framed them as necessary acts of justice against traitors, though they served primarily to shift blame and assert dominance. The execution grounds, located within the gardens of Nero on the Vatican Hill, became infamous for their cruelty. Witnesses reported that the victims were arranged along pathways and fountains, their flames flickering across marble statues and reflecting in pools. The suffering continued for hours as the emperor's guests dined and applauded. These acts were not isolated incidents. They reflected a broader shift in Nero's use of power. Public punishment had always been part of Roman political theater, but Nero transformed it into artifice, an aesthetic of fear. His spectacles combined cruelty with performance, merging governance with exhibition. Beyond the burning executions, Nero employed various forms of torture against those accused of conspiracy or treason. Crucifixions, animal maulings, and mutilations were common punishments. He used these displays to reinforce imperial authority and deter dissent among citizens and senators alike. In 65 CE, the Pisonian conspiracy attempted to overthrow Nero. The plot included senators, officers, and intellectuals dissatisfied with his rule. When it was discovered, Nero responded with a wave of arrests and executions. The philosopher Seneca, once his tutor and advisor, was ordered to take his own life. His forced suicide symbolized the emperor's break from any pretense of moral restraint. The suppression of the conspiracy deepened Nero's paranoia. He began viewing even minor criticisms as threats to the state. Informants flourished, and accusations of treason became a political weapon. The Praetorian Guard carried out arrests without trial, and the Senate largely complied out of fear. Public opinion continued to deteriorate despite his efforts to maintain popularity through games and entertainment. Citizens who had lost homes in the fire saw little benefit from his rebuilding programs. The grandeur of his new palace, the Domus Aurea, contrasted sharply with their struggles, further alienating him from the population. The image of Nero as an artist emperor persisted alongside that of a tyrant. He continued performing in public theaters and musical competitions, sometimes compelling audiences to remain until he finished. His obsession with applause reflected his growing detachment from administrative reality. Meanwhile, the persecution of Christians expanded beyond Rome. Local governors and magistrates across the provinces followed the imperial example, punishing adherents of the new faith with imprisonment, execution, or forced labor. The association between Christianity and treason persisted for generations after Nero's rule. The use of Christians as scapegoats marked a significant development in Roman policy. It was the first state-sanctioned persecution of the group and set a precedent for later emperors. The accounts of these events became central to early Christian history and martyrdom literature, shaping the religion's collective memory. Archaeological evidence near the Vatican Hill supports the historical presence of mass graves from Nero's time. While direct identification of individual victims remains uncertain, written sources consistently link the area with imperial executions. These accounts form a consistent narrative of systematic punishment under Nero's command. Roman historians interpreted Nero's actions as both political and psychological. They described him as a ruler who sought admiration through destruction and artistry through suffering. His spectacles blurred the line between justice and entertainment, turning death into display. The emperor's reputation among the elite suffered irreparably. Senators feared his unpredictability, military officers doubted his leadership, and the populace viewed his extravagance as excessive. Yet, despite widespread criticism, Nero maintained control through a combination of fear, bribery, and spectacle. His rule exemplified the extremes of imperial authority in the early Roman Empire. He redefined the emperor not as a statesman, but as a performer whose stage was the empire itself. The Human Candles stood as the most notorious symbol of this transformation, a demonstration of how governance, art, and cruelty converged under his reign. The events following the Great Fire marked the transition of Nero's image from eccentric ruler to inflictor of terror. The empire's administrative systems continued to function, but they did so under the shadow of coercion and punishment. His use of public torture not only reinforced his dominance, but also revealed the instability of his rule. By 67 CE, Nero's authority was increasingly sustained by the military rather than by civic or senatorial support. The emperor's detachment from the realities of governance, combined with his reliance on fear, created a fragile political structure. Discontent spread quietly among provinces and legions, signaling the beginning of unrest that would soon surface. Nero's fascination with spectacle and pain had redefined the nature of Roman punishment. His gardens, once symbols of imperial luxury, had become fields of execution. In this era, the flame of his torches represented both his control and his corruption, lighting Rome's nights while extinguishing lives in the name of power. By 67 CE, Nero's rule had entered a phase of instability. The Roman treasury was depleted by his extravagant projects, and his popularity had declined among both the Senate and the army. The memory of the human candles and other brutal spectacles had eroded public sympathy. Discontent grew quietly across the provinces, where military commanders began questioning his authority. The first major challenge arose in Gaul when Gaius Julius Vindex, a provincial governor, rebelled against Nero's rule. Vindex condemned the emperor's extravagance and called for restoration of senatorial integrity. Nero attempted to rally loyalty through propaganda and promises, but his appeals were met with indifference. The rebellion revealed how far his influence had weakened outside Rome. Around the same period, the legions in Hispania under Servius Sulpicius Galba declared support for the revolt. Galba positioned himself as a defender of the Roman state, claiming legitimacy to oppose Nero. These movements marked the beginning of what would later be known as the Year of the Four Emperors, a period of rapid political upheaval following Nero's fall. In Rome, the Senate began distancing itself from Nero's decisions. The Praetorian Guard, once his loyal force, showed signs of discontent due to delayed payments and diminishing trust in the emperor's leadership. Realizing his vulnerability, Nero attempted to secure funds by imposing new taxes and confiscating property from wealthy citizens, actions that deepened resentment. Reports from the provinces made it clear that his authority was collapsing. When he learned that the Senate had declared him a public enemy, Nero fled the city. He took a small group of loyal servants and hid in a villa outside Rome, near the estate of one of his freedmen. His isolation at this point symbolized the complete disintegration of his imperial power. While in hiding, Nero contemplated escape to Egypt, imagining he could start a new life as a musician or performer. His remaining followers discouraged this idea, knowing that capture was inevitable. Roman soldiers were already searching for him to carry out the Senate's decree of execution. According to historical sources, Nero realized that no support remained. Facing arrest and humiliation, he chose suicide on June 9, 68 CE. Assisted by his secretary Epaphroditus, he drove a dagger into his throat, reportedly saying, "What an artist dies in me." His death ended the Julio-Claudian dynasty and plunged Rome into civil unrest. News of his death was met with mixed reactions. The Senate celebrated his fall, the soldiers awaited new leadership, and some segments of the populace mourned the loss of the emperor who had entertained them. Despite his cruelty, Nero's reign left a lasting imprint on Roman culture and politics. In later centuries, stories of Nero persisted as cautionary examples of power corrupted by vanity. The image of Rome lit by burning prisoners became a defining symbol of tyranny. His rule demonstrated how art, authority, and cruelty could merge under absolute power, leaving a legacy remembered more for destruction than for governance.